Canucks fans, and welcome back to another episode of the Canucks Conversation, brought to you by the great folks over at Wendy's Daily Faceoff Survivor game. Again, no comment on my game this week because I just forgot to start, but I'll be back with a vengeance next week because Wendy's is letting you and me win real food with your fantasy teams this year and Daily Faceoff. For those of you who smoke the competition, Wendy's is rewarding you with weekly prizes that will have you winning. Download the Wendy's app and score yourself 150 bonus reward points on your first order and grab a sweet victory from the mouth-watering jaws of defeat, along with some fresh, never frozen beef. Sign up to play Daily Face-Off Survivor Fantasy to win weekly prizes like the spicy chicken sandwich from Wendy's and the Wendy's app. Jeff, have you participated in this game at all this year?
I have not, but I'm intrigued now.
Lucky you.
Well, that read right there just got me thinking that I'd like to stop by Wendy's. I know I don't have to stop by Wendy's to participate in the game here, but yeah.
But you should.
Spicy chicken combo.
That's right.
Take that down. How come we didn't start with the Star Spangled Banner today?
Don't even start. Don't start. My Swedes fall in the tournament. We're not even going to start there. I refuse to start with heartbreak on this show. And it just, I don't know.
So we're going to talk about the Canucks loss in St. Louis.
That's right. That's right. That's way less heartbreaking than watching all three of our boys over there. Jonathan Lekarmaki, Tom Willander, and Elias Pettersson, or Elias, however he wants to pronounce it. Have you noticed that it's been changed a few times? Just like I guess it was with the older Elias Pettersson, but
yep.
I'm hearing Elias, I'm hearing Elias, and I thought it was Elias at first, and now I don't know what to think. Anyways, hot start to the show today, but fine, we'll start there. We'll start at the World Junior Championship where Sweden lost 6-2 to those, as I called them yesterday, scumbags from the United States. They left Hunter Brstevich, noted Lego fan Hunter Brstevich, off of the roster.
My father was born in the States. I once tried to take out American citizenship. It didn't happen.
Lucky you.
So
there you go.
I am still a Canadian through and through. Yeah, look, Americans were the favorites going into this tournament, and they end up capturing gold. Pulled away in the end. It wasn't really a 6-2 hockey game, but final score is what it is. 3-2 after the Johnny bomb there at the end of the second period. Yeah. And 7 goals, tournament MVP, named to the All-Star team. It really was a terrific event for Jonathan Lekarmaki. And again, this is a guy that's playing professionally over in Sweden as a 19-year-old. Like, he should have had a good tournament, and he did. And good for him. And another big-time goal there that got them within 1 late in the second period. And you thought maybe there would be a comeback. And it is incredible. Like, when you look at the record of the Swedes, the success that they've had in the preliminary round of the World Juniors, always a contender and always the bridesmaid as well. Like, they just can't get over the hump. And they couldn't in front of their home fans today, but the Americans were the better team on balance, certainly in this hockey game. So great individual performance for Jonathan Lekarmaki right through the event, but in the end, Team USA skates away with the gold. And that USA team is they're very stacked. Yeah. They're a very, very good team through and through. They were the cocky bunch. Did you see blowing kisses to the crowd? Yeah. Scumbags, one might call them. I don't know who might call them that, but I'm just saying. I found it interesting because I keep harping on this, and Dave Hall wrote about it yesterday over at Canucks Army, but the fact that Jonathan Lekarmaki went from being the 13th forward at last year's tournament for Sweden, and I understand he's a year older. I know he's playing over in Sweden professionally, but hey, he was last year too, albeit in the second division for most of last year. But to go from 13th forward to tournament MVP, I'm trying to think if there's been a player like that in the past that's done exactly that. Like, but this is junior hockey. It's the nature of junior hockey. And I had the good fortune of spending 5 full years calling games up in Kamloops. Like, I watched this where a guy would go home at the end of his 16-year-old season as this scrawny rookie, put on 20 pounds over the summer, come back in his draft year and absolutely, play his way into the first round of the NHL draft. And the same thing would hold with a 17-year-old that would go home and come back as an 18-year-old and he had filled out. So, it's not unprecedented. I don't know. But draft plus 1 is what we're talking about here, right? Right. So you're right. Like, off the top of my head, I can't come up with names for you, but I wouldn't be shocked if there had been a guy that, went from basically a fringe player on his team one year to absolutely starring in the show the following year. I just like, the pressure was there. Patrick Alvin's watching, the home crowd, like all of that. and the disappointment of last year individually and collectively for the Swedes. For Lekkerimaki, like this was a great, huge strides over the last 12 months. Yeah. So there is some excitement, and that shot is undeniable. The guy shoots it differently than others in his age group, and he kept putting that on display. Everybody in the tournament knew that he was going to shoot, and he kept doing the Ovechkin thing, which is just keep firing and finding the mark. And the goal that he scored in the gold medal game, again, big time one-timer, just absolutely rips it. He's fearless. I think 34 shots over the course of 7 games, so a volume shooter. He knows where his bread is buttered. Is he going to be able to play that way in the NHL? We'll find out in time, but there's going to have to be some adaptation to the smaller ice and time and space and all those types of things. But in the here and now, this was the game. This was the level that he was playing at, and he looked terrific.
The shot, when, like you said, everybody knows it's coming, and you're still overpowering goaltenders, you're still overpowering teams, and it's still going in. That's where you get into that upper echelon. And again, I know it's junior. I'm not trying to hype the guy up too much, but that's where you talk about guys like Alex Ovechkin, like David Pastrnak, right? Like he does the same thing over in Boston. And again, I know it's junior. We're not going to overhype this prospect as much as we'd like to.
No, but it certainly beats the alternative of, oh, what a disappointment. Didn't score in this tournament when he was expected to. No, this guy rose to the occasion. And again, I mean, first round NHL pick, like you would have some expectations, but not everybody was the tournament MVP. Not everybody scored 7 goals in this tournament. He did. So he can certainly leave the tournament and leave the rink with his head held high.
And exactly. It's like I said, like last year, 13th forward, and now he's the tournament MVP. That is a great rise for him. And like you said, he rose to the occasion. Okay, that was our prospects report, which was brought to you by our friends at 4 Winds Brewing, family owned and operated in Delta, home to the 4 Winds Light Lager, a crisp, clean, and easy drinking beer. There it is, a beer for everyone, a perfect beer for before, after, or during the game. No matter what game you're watching, 4 Winds Light is there. Ask for 4 Winds Light Lager at your local liquor store, or have some delivered right to your door through the online shop at 4windsbrewing.ca. Okay. Do you want? Yeah, we have to do it. Frank Seravalli is going to join us in about 12 minutes time. But we have to talk about it, Jeff. A 2-1 loss to the St. Louis Blues. Yeah. I haven't listened to Rink Wide, so admittedly, every take you give is going to be one I hear for the first time. But I wonder if you agree with me here, because when I was watching that game, I was thinking to myself, the Canucks aren't really playing poorly. Like, if you take the game that they played in St. Louis, and then you take the game they played against the Ottawa Senators, and now I know they had a 5-0 lead, but raw in terms of chances created, and let's be honest, some of those chances that they scored in that Ottawa game were pretty lucky bounces. I think you take this game they gave St. Louis over the one with the Ottawa Senators, albeit with some more finishing.
I hear what you're saying. I too didn't think they played poorly. They certainly didn't get run out of the rink. Brock Besser, 24 goals on the season, has scored from that spot on the ice that he had the opportunity with 3 minutes gone in the third period. Would have tied the game at 2. I mean, that was the goal they were looking for, and he didn't score this time. One of the things that I laughed at on Twitter, people were like, well, Lekkerimaki would have scored there.
Yeah.
Brock knows a thing or two about scoring in the NHL. He just didn't pull it. The disappointment was he missed the net. Like, make Binnington make a save, but I guess you get to that level and you're trying to pick your spots, and it's such a fine line, and he missed the target. But Höglander moments later had a chance off a little bit of a scramble. Teddy Bluger off the rush in the third period. Dakota Joshua. Like, there were opportunities. And this is a team that when they've been down, the bounces have gone their way. They've manufactured the offense necessary. Hey, it didn't happen for them last night. But I didn't think they played poorly. Now, credit to the St. Louis Blues. They made their coaching change. They seem to have tightened things up. They're playing better. Robert Thomas is their most dangerous player, and the Canucks kind of let him get away there in the third in a 1-1 tie. So I'm not going to rip the Canucks, but this is 3 times in 8 games now that they've been held to a single goal. You're not going to get the bounces like you did against Ottawa. You're not going to play San Jose like you did that game before Christmas. So when the going's good, sure, the offense flows, but guess what? Minnesota, they make you grind. Yep. The Philadelphia Flyers came in with a game plan and made the Canucks grind. And even last night, I didn't think it had a playoff feel. There wasn't a lot of offense, and the Canucks weren't able to manufacture the goal that they needed to get it to overtime. And that's where the conversation turns to the 39-goal scorer that was a healthy scratch for the 5th time already this season.
And we'll get to Kuzmenko in a moment. The thing I just want to highlight is, like, the grind it down games, like the one we saw last night. Those are the ones that the Canucks have been dropping this year. Like, all of their losses, for the most part, have been those grind you down games. And I think that's where the concern is that, when those games happen a lot, Jeff?
Later
The
in the
playoffs.
season, and then into the playoffs.
The playoffs.
Dave, they've been held under 3 goals 5 times this season. 2-0 loss in Philadelphia, 4-1 loss to Vegas, and then the games that I just referenced: 2-1 shootout loss in Minnesota, 4-1 to the Flyers, 2-1 last night. And so they struggle. Now, they beat Dallas 2-0 earlier in the year as well, so it's not like they haven't won a couple of low-scoring games. But you're right. Like, look at the opponents. Philadelphia plays that style under John Tortorella, and they scored 1 goal in 2 games against the Flyers this year. Vegas came in and absolutely fed the Canucks their lunch in late November. So I do think that this is still a question that has to be answered about, can they adapt? Do they have the personnel? We know that Rick Tocchet wants them to play that kind of robust style that's going to serve them well in the playoffs. But again, you're not going to get 10 like they did in San Jose. You're not going to get 8 like they did on opening night against the Edmonton Oilers. You're going to have to find a way to grind. And, in a 1-goal game, you want to believe that Elias Pettersson can provide some magic. But, boy, he didn't have it last night. And, again, it's sort of a part of a bigger discussion about, is it on him to elevate and make the guys around him better, or are you asking way too much of Elias Pettersson by playing him with an ice-cold Ilya Mikheyev? And I don't think people are talking about this, but he's gone 6 without a goal, hasn't scored since the deflection goal in Chicago, 1 goal in his last 10, and he was invisible last night.
Yep.
And so was Sam Lafferty. And so that line got outshot, I think 11-4, a 1 shot on goal from the 3 of them, and that was Elias Pettersson. It just wasn't happening. And yet Rick Tocchet stuck with it. Like, I was surprised. All right, I had no problem. Like, Lafferty can give you a little juice, as Rick Tocchet says. He didn't last night.
Mm-hmm.
I don't pin the loss on Sam Lafferty, but I was surprised that Tocchet, okay, Lafferty's not going, that line's not going. Why wouldn't you boost Nils Höglander and give him an opportunity later in the game at some point? So I don't know. Rick Tocchet, it was weird. I mean, Tocchet's pushed just about every button correctly this year for the Vancouver Canucks. The proof is in the record at 24-11-3. I mean, it was their 11th outright loss of the season.
Yep.
Not going to get freaky about it, but Connor Garland, without Kuzmenko, Connor Garland goes to power play 1. Nikita Zadorov is the net front presence with the goalie pulled.
Only good thing they did last night.
Right, but it just felt like flinging things against the wall time and time again, hoping to find something. And guess what? Those are the Blues. Playing well under the new coaching change or whatever. I'll give them credit. But there are way better opponents out there in the NHL. We're going to see a bunch of them here as they move on and move east on this road trip. And so, again, the effort was all right. But clearly, all right didn't get it done against the St. Louis Blues, and all right won't get it done against the top-end teams in the National Hockey League.
You brought up the top 6. You brought up Elias Pettersson and his line. The thing that I looked at, Jeff, is at the start of the season, when Phil DiGiuseppe was playing in the top 6, we all knew, okay, well, he's not going to be there by the end of the season. Like, this isn't going to last all season long, but hey, what a great story for Phil DiGiuseppe that he's there. Similar tone with Sam Lafferty, and we kind of knew that, but now... And I think the conversation, at least the ones that Harman and I were having a lot, was, yeah, it's not going to last all season, so they're probably going to have to go out and get somebody. They're probably going to have to go shore up their top 6. But let's get there when we get there. I think you're there now. And I think you're there now because when we were having those conversations, Jeff, we weren't thinking that Andrei Kuzmenko was going to fall off a cliff and work his way back into the coach's doghouse and be legitimately unplayable under this coach, which is where we're at now. Like, he's not playing, and it's not to send a message anymore. It's because, hey, I don't trust you when we don't have last change and we're on the road. Like, all of his scratches, all 5 of them have come with the Canucks on the road. That was pointed out by Josh Elliott Wolf last night on Twitter.
Right, which I think there's 2 angles to that story. One is the matchup element that he doesn't trust him. I also think, to a degree, though, it's easier to scratch him on the road. There wasn't a single member of the independent local media in St. Like, Tocchet didn't have to answer questions yesterday about scratching Andrei Kuzmenko. Yep. So you can do that on the road. He knows if he does it at home, that's going to be the first question, whether they win or lose. So, I don't discount that part of it as well. And I guess for me, the troubling part is the decision to scratch Kuzmenko in and of itself, fine. But you're also choosing then to put Linus Karlsson, an AHL call-up, clearly your 13th best forward available to you, to put him in the lineup ahead of Kuzmenko, and then he's out there for what turns out to be the game-winning goal. Like, Kuzmenko can make that defensive play, and he also brings an element of maybe he generates the offense you need. in a tight, low-scoring game like this. The other part, too, is if they got this game to overtime, Linus Karlsson's certainly not getting shifts in OT. If it goes to a shootout, Linus Karlsson, you'd have to go deep before you got to Linus Karlsson in the shootout, where Kuzmenko could end up being a difference maker. So for all his warts and all the faults, there are still ways that he could impact that game that Linus Karlsson couldn't. And I don't know. I just, where does it go from here? Like, this is now the fifth scratch, as you said. They've come in pairs earlier, so we'll see if this is going to turn into more than just one game. But it keeps happening, right? Like, so Kuzmenko isn't doing the things that the coaches are looking for. Otherwise, he'd stay in the lineup and he'd keep playing, but he keeps coming out. It can't go on. And I asked the question on Twitter last night, like, if he can't get into game 38 in St. Louis, is he going to play in the playoffs for Rick Tocchet?
That's a great question.
And the answer seems like it might be no. So if that's the case, then move him on. Like, this isn't tenable for a team that has so few issues right now. I just feel like this is bubbling beneath the surface. I know they had this big powwow down in Dallas the last time they did a healthy scratch. They thought they had sort of ironed some things out. And here we are again, 2 games into the new year, and he's a healthy scratch for an AHLer who got 9 minutes of ice time. I fear that this is going to become bigger drama as it goes. And then what's the trickle down? Like, Elias Pettersson's looking around saying, like, I need somebody to play with, and you've got this guy sitting in the press box. Like, what's going on here? I do feel like this has the potential to get a little more disruptive internally than it has to this point.
It's officially in distraction territory.
Yeah,
I think, or dangerously close. If that, I don't want to be too reactionary here, but it's like I pointed out earlier, this wasn't to send a message. This is because, hey, I don't think you're going to help us win. And this, look, Rick Tocchet has received a lot of praise, and for very good reason in this market. He's the Jack Adams front runner. He deserves all the praise his way. But this isn't revisionist history when we come out and say things like, yeah, Linus Karlsson in the lineup probably didn't make a lot of sense. Like, Harman and I were harping on this yesterday, and it's for the reasons you brought up. And look, to their credit, I thought the fourth line played a pretty safe game, but I want to throw on Coach Quad's cap again.
They got the winner. They're out there.
And through blown defensive coverage too.
Yeah.
Now, and Grady, can we get the video here? And podcast listeners, I apologize for this. If you want to know what I'm talking about, go watch the Robert Thomas. Maybe you remember it.
Jordan Kyrou. Little wizardry there. Now the pass comes across the center to Thomas.
Yeah, I guess not. Yeah, credit to the NHL and Sportsnet on that. But what I wanted to highlight was the fact that every coach is different. But in my mind, when I'm watching that play, Linus Karlsson's technically in the right spot as the weak side winger, but he also needs to make the adjustment because Nils Höglander is trying to adjust for Linus Karlsson standing in the same spot, and Linus Karlsson needs to make that adjustment. Like, Nils Amon had 2 guys. I don't really pin that on Nils Amon at all. And again, I'm not trying to poke blame at Linus Karlsson or Nils Höglander. I'm just saying that a reason you're not playing Kuzmenko is because you're worried about plays like that. Well, that play happened, and you had no offensive upside on that line. And now I'm picking at Linus Karlsson a little bit because you decided to dress an AHL call-up ahead of the guy who scored 39 goals last season. That just doesn't make sense to me.
So a couple of things. One is that, and again, credit to Bannister for recognizing that's the Canucks' fourth line. He gets Robert Thomas out there. They get the mismatch that they're looking for in a 1-1 tie in the third period. Like, you've got to have your head on a swivel. If Robert Thomas is on the ice, he is the most dangerous St. Louis Blue. And so I'm not ready to absolve Nils Amon. He's the closest guy to him. He kind of does the little stick check.
Sure.
You've got to do a better job of closing down on him. I didn't like the zone entry, and that's Quinn Hughes and Philip Hronek. And Quinn Hughes has been all world. He goes to the All-Star, or gets the nod yesterday, but he was on the ice for both of the goals against. That doesn't happen that often for him, but the zone entry was so welcoming, if you will. Like, the defense just backed off, let the Blues gain the zone, and that's where the trouble began. Some side-to-side passing. Forwards lose their guys. You're right, the 2 on the one side, and that creates the space in the middle for Robert Thomas. So there were breakdowns there. Rick Tocchet talked about he thought the Blues used their weak side well. Both of their goals come off the rush. And so, are there things to tidy up? Yeah, and I would say that that's something. It's on-ice awareness, knowing where the Blues are, trying to create the mismatches, and they were able to do that. And Colton Parayko scores his goal, racing downhill, attacking the net, and Robert Thomas off the rush into the slot And man, that was a big league shot. And look, the Canucks wasted a really good goaltending effort too by
Yep.
Thatcher Demko. That's
another angle. Yep. And also Grady pointed out in our little private chat here that I should have highlighted it as well. Right before the entry, Linus Karlsson was the guy that got passed by rather easily. He's not good enough in the neutral zone in terms of pressure. And hey, like, again, I'm not trying to say, Andrei Kuzmenko makes that play 10 out of 10. Well, maybe he does make that play, but I mean, he doesn't do much better, maybe.
But if he makes that play, he's coming out of the line.
Exactly. Bang on. And we both agree he's getting back in tomorrow in New Jersey?
I think so. I mean, the Devils play an up-tempo style. I think there'll be some scoring chances. I'd like to think that, again, you send the message, although I'm kind of...
But it's not, you're not sending...
I get that, but give the guy an opportunity here to get back in the lineup. The power play, only the one opportunity last night, didn't generate a shot on goal. That's where we talked about Connor Garland. And look, Garland has earned a promotion. I had no issues with that. But on the fly, you're now injecting a guy that we know is sometimes difficult to read off of, and you're never sure what he's doing. And there he was hiding in that crouch beside the screen grabs are great in isolation because it looks like he's trying to hide behind the goalpost. But
almost did it too. He almost pulled it off.
No, I know, but it's a different element for Paterson and Miller and Besser to read off of in game. And so say what you will about Kuzmenko, he's been part of a damn successful power play in his year and a half here in Vancouver. And so I hope he gets back in because I look at the candidates right now to be top six wingers for Elias Pettersson. Ilya Mikheyev, 1 goal in 10. Sam Lafferty, 1 goal in 10. Niels Höglander, 1 goal in 10. He's gone quiet too after a little bit of a run there. And then you get Kuzmenko, who has 4 goals in 7 and has been a healthy scratch in 3 of those other games. So just right there, the numbers alone suggest that even if he's not playing well, Kuzmenko still represents the idea of a goal scorer more than some of those other players do. So I'm curious to see what they do. Again, we talked about the fact that independent media are not out there on this leg of the trip. I think some are catching up in the New York area, but the Canucks practiced in New Jersey. Nobody there to document, like, were there new line combinations? Is Carson Soucy taking a regular shift? Like, this is where the fans suffer because we're just not getting the information necessary. And like, it's a big financial undertaking to get out on the road. Trust me, I've been there. I understand that. But I'm not sure the hockey club, like, there are people that, and it's not just us in this business, fans want to know. Like, this is all the stuff we're talking about. Is Kuzmenko getting back in? Did he have a regular shift at practice today? And yet the whole practice took place under the cover of darkness.
The Travis Green special. Those are Travis Green's dream practices, right? It's the ones that nobody gets to see.
Exactly.
And anyways, we could tell stories about that for hours, but we won't, because our man, Frank Seravalli, has been patiently waiting for us. He joins us on this Friday afternoon. Frank, a question that we're going to ask in our Anyone Else segment, and oh my gosh, the USA shirt, of course. You know, we're big Sweden guys over here, right? We're big Sweden fans in Vancouver.
You didn't happen to be in the neighborhood of Prudential Center this afternoon, did you, man? Can you just swing by the Rock and get us some line combos, Frank?
It's funny, J-Pat, as you said that, I was like, man, had I known, I would have just gone up there today.
Oh yeah, well,
it's only about an hour from my house.
That always, anyways, we're not going to start talking about U.S. geography because I find it very interesting how you can drive almost. How far is New York for you? Sorry, now I'm asking questions.
Well, yeah, New York City is just on the other side of the Rock, so 10 minutes from there, maybe with traffic, probably 25, 30. It's like it's 3 or 4 miles. That's it.
What the hell's a mile?
Yeah, that's
anyways.
Go USA.
Yeah, go USA. Yeah.
I thought you were going to blow us kissing.
Frank, okay, so like I was saying, the conversation that we're having on this show is, when will the Canucks make a trade? Because all of the experiments in the top 6 seem like they've lost their shine.
Isn't that just the nature of an 82-game season? I mean, at some point, even the best players, Connor McDavid, Elias Pettersson, whoever it might be, Quinn Hughes, they hit a rough patch. So if the best players in the world are doing it, then at some point, the guys that are a couple notches down are going to fall into the same trap. In terms of experiments, I think there's none bigger than, exactly what's happening right now with Kuzmenko. When you look at where the Canucks are at in terms of cap and consequences with that in terms of what other deadline moves they might be able to make. It'd be so nice to have a ready-made solution in-house that you don't have to go out and get, that you could maybe fill another void instead. And so I'd love to see Kuzmenko get another crack at it and see if he can sort of fall in line with what the coaching staff is looking for, because that's been one of the real head scratchers this season, is how a player that was that good last year, that created that much chemistry and is clearly a successful tool on the power play, hasn't been able to get going this year.
It's 5 healthy scratches now before the midway mark. And you just wonder, like the first couple were message sending. This one, it feels like an exasperated head coach, that the message isn't getting through and that he's not liking what he's seeing. And so 39 goals last year, an absolute heater of a shooting percentage. I think we all thought that there would be some sort of a step back, but for him to now be at 8 goals at the midway mark, essentially, a distressed asset, obviously, but do you think would there be interest in the player? Obviously 5.5, it's not easy to fit under a salary cap for all teams, but what would teams around the NHL, would they see the 39 goal scorer, or are they looking at a guy that right now is having trouble fitting in with a coach in this kind of system?
I think they're probably way more likely to see, if they're acquiring him, the 39 goal scorer, at least somewhere in the middle, that maybe he doesn't quite get back to the level that he was at last year, although I wouldn't count it out, that maybe he's somewhere in between, that he could be a useful tool. And at $5.5 million, that's really all you're asking for, isn't it? Like, it's not, it's not 11.2, it's not 8, it's 5.5. That's kind of what a mid-range forward, middle 6 forward should be getting in today's NHL, provided that they're able to produce. And I'd love to know, really, I'd love to inject some truth serum into Rick Tocchet and really get the answer of, what exactly is it that he's looking for that he's not getting so far this year from Kuzmenko.
He always talks about, the plays at both blue lines and not hustling back enough and not getting in on the forecheck, but it really seems to be sort of the high danger spinorama stuff at the blue line, turning pucks over. That's what he has repeatedly talked about when people have asked him. You'd think that a player at some point, you could get that out of your game, because Tocchet said 2 weeks ago, he said, if you're one-on-one with a guy, you want to do your spinorama there down low in the offensive zone. I think he said, have a party. It was the line that he used. But he's seeing too much of that in the neutral zone and at the blue line, and pucks are being turned over and going the other way. So I do think that some of this has to be on Kuzmenko, and it can't be lost in translation. They've got other Russians in the locker room. They've got Sergei Gonchar on the staff. So it's not about the message getting through. It kind of feels now like a battle of wills between the player and the coach, and that rarely works out well for the player.
Yeah, it never ends well. But here's the thing I'll say, and look, full marks to Rick Tocchet for what he's done this year, the structure that they've put in place, the way that this team has played and has been consistently good almost the entire season. A lot of that, when you talk to the Canucks front office, they give that credit to the coach. But to me, the way that Kuzmenko, is right now, the spot that he's in, to me is a failure more on the coaching staff than it is the player. And the reason for that is you have to be able to bend a little bit. And that works both ways. Kuzmenko has to be able to bend a little bit, but same thing with Rick Tocchet. And as a coach, I think about this a lot. It's not nearly on the same scale, but when I coach, I feel like I judge myself based on the strides that the players at the bottom of my lineup make over the course of a season. And you have to harness what the player does really exceptionally well. And for Kuzmenko, that's being a productive, creative, offensive player. And you have to find a way to not choke that out. And to his point, he said, offensive zone, go have a party. But you have to be willing to take some of the flaws that a player has and be able to work with them. And I don't know that 5 healthy scratches through the first 40 games of the year is something that makes a lot of sense for someone that is really obviously talented and still has some term. It's not like, they can just kind of dispatch him at the end of this year. He's not going anywhere unless you find a way to trade him at this deadline. And in some ways, I feel like based on the way he played last year, it might be selling at his lowest value point.
Oh, that's for sure. Yeah, like there's talk of selling him at the last deadline. Think of the cap hit he was on last year when he was on pace to score 40 goals at that point. And Frank, that point you just brought up, I find it really interesting because it's something I've tried to give a lot of thought to. And I look back at what we've seen with Dakota Joshua, Nils Höglander, and the thing that Rick Tocchet always says when he speaks about these kind of players and the situations surrounding them is meet me in the middle. That's what he likes to say is meet me in the middle. I'll do this, you do this. And Jeff, I guess this is a question for you as well that we can kind of all three of us talk about is what does meeting Andrei Kuzmenko in the middle really look like? Because Tocchet has his non-negotiables, Frank. Like when he got hired here, he said, I have the non-negotiables. And for guys like JT Miller, for example, JT Miller was somebody that had to start respecting those non-negotiables about back checking, hustling to the bench for changes, all that sort of stuff. So we know Rick Tocchet's not going to give on any of his non-negotiables. But I mean, Jeff, I'll ask you, and Frank, you as well chime in. But like, what does it look like for Rick Tocchet to meet Andrei Kuzmenko in the middle?
I think Frank mentioned the fact that there has to be some flexibility here, that it's not equal across the board for everybody. I think you have to work with players, find their strengths, try to eliminate some of their weaknesses. And for Kuzmenko, obviously, there are still questions about the forecheck. And I thought Tocchet's been so good in terms of explaining his thought process. And he went deep a couple of weeks back, too, when he said that one of the problems with Kuzmenko is when they need him to be the first guy in on the forecheck, he's so reluctant. And that is causing issues for the second guy because he doesn't know where Kuzmenko is going to be on the ice. And, they've got structure. They've got places that they're supposed to be based on the reads that they're making. And so I just thought, okay, I mean, that's a great explanation that, people can say, oh, he's not back checking, but what are the issues on the forecheck? Well, it's not just that he's not getting on his horse and getting in. He's not a physical guy. I think he has 2 hits on the season, but you can still positionally forecheck and angle guys and force them into places they don't want to be. But if you're reluctant, then the trickle down is your teammates don't know where to go and everything kind of gets out of whack there. So I do think that, Rick Tocchet's got to, again, work with this player. I think they've done some of that, but if it's the fact that the things that they're trying to get out of his game aren't coming out of his game, I said last night, Frank, if he can't play in game 38 in St. Louis, like what are the chances that he's going to be able to play effectively in Tocchet's system in the playoffs? And the Canucks are headed to the playoffs. So I do think it's time to start looking at some of these things through a playoff prism.
I don't think you're ever going to eliminate some of those things. You can try and work with a player. The thing is you have to be willing to accept or not. And if you're not, then you have to cut bait. That's really the thing. At this age, Kuzmenko as a player is what he is. He's probably not changing a whole heck of a lot. He could do some little things differently and maybe try to get closer to meeting Tocchet in the middle, but you are what you are most of the time.
That's really interesting. And again, we just keep coming back to the timeline, right? Like Rick Tocchet coached Kuzmenko for 1 game before that extension. And Don Taylor was pointing this out on Donnie and Dolly this morning. That game was the game where Kuzmenko scored 2 goals in Chicago and was player of the game. So if Rick Tocchet's asked the next day, hey, what do you think? We're thinking of extending this guy. Yeah, for sure.
Nothing anybody did against Chicago last year should have been used as any sort of barometer. I think I scored 3 goals against the Blackhawks last season, if I'm not mistaken.
Not only that, but these extensions don't come together that quickly. It was probably weeks in the making before Tocchet was even there, and it was long since done by the time he arrived.
And that's another thing. And I mean, again, truth serum.
That's been the MO of the Canucks front office, though, is doing things out of order at times that has really, I think, hurt their process over the last 5 years.
What are some other examples of that you'd point to?
The fact that Francesco Aquilini hired Bruce Boudreau before hiring the GM and president of hockey ops. I mean, it set them back 1.5 years.
Yep. But they're heading down that road again, trying to make big picture organizational decisions without Elias Pettersson, locked and loaded here. Like they're going to have to make decisions ahead of the trade deadline on players. Philip Hronek's going to get, like, in a perfect world, you get Pettersson done, you'd have Hronek, and you'd know exactly where all those are slotted. And yet they're going to have to make some big time decisions with the uncertainty of the financials on some of those key contracts.
I'm not entirely sold that is all going to come to pass. Like I'm not making any projections or predictions, but I wouldn't be shocked if they could really push to get Pettersson done before the deadline.
Well, it would certainly make life easier on a couple of fronts. It would give them certainty. They'd know that their star player was here and going to be here for a while. because they do have some decisions. They got so many unrestricted free agents or pending UFAs that they're not all coming back, but I do think they have some that they, want to re-up. But, every dollar matters in the cap, even with the cap going up. But you got the OEL contract on the books here. And so, we'll see where all of that goes. But I mean, that's best case scenario for them. And I know that sort of the same hope with Nylander in Toronto, that the All-Star game kind of feels like it's an artificial deadline, but it also feels like it's there. We're now within a month of it. And, somebody made the great point yesterday. Like, I don't know if Elias Pettersson is going to go to the All-Star game. They've got so many candidates and it's a numbers game, but can you imagine him, Frank, sitting there front and center on media day, just like bombarded with questions about his contract? Like, he doesn't want any part of that.
Yes, I can.
Frank, just before we close out here, I want to ask you this question because, again, I know off top, I asked you, when will the Canucks make a trade? And that's kind of the topic we're focusing on. There's so many factors. There's the fact that the Canucks have built themselves a cushion that they don't need to make any sort of panic move, whether we want them to or not. They don't need to make a trade immediately, but with Jim Rutherford teams of the past, and hell, even Jim Rutherford Canucks teams, they traded Bo Horvat before the All-Star break last year. Do you expect the Canucks, and hey, one of the factors that might suggest that they're going to wait a bit is the Elias Pettersson contract extension. Do you expect them to be active long before the deadline like we've seen Jim Rutherford teams in years past do? Or do you think we're going to see more action on deadline day and in the days leading right up to the deadline?
I think they're going to try and be more active ahead of time. I think part of the issue is, and I was talking about this with an NHL player yesterday who goes, I don't really understand this league. The way he explained it, he said, there's 22 good teams, there's 5 god-awful teams, and 5 elite teams. And he said the 22 that are in that mix are not really entirely crystallized, some more than others, but aren't really crystallized in terms of which way they're thinking, which way they're heading. And this is a player that actually wants to try and get moved. And he was saying, I'm having a hard time getting out of here because the response from a bunch of teams that may potentially could be interested in me, well, they just don't know exactly yet what their posture is when it comes to the trade deadline. I think that's part of it. Has been a big sort of, wrench in some teams' plans of, what's going on with Pittsburgh and Washington and what happens with some of the teams that are in the murky middle in the West, the Nashvilles, the St. Louis's, that group that could kind of maybe be playoff teams, but are also, have the real potential to be passed by Edmonton and Minnesota, or maybe even in Arizona, for instance. So look, that part has been tough to sort out. Here's what I'll say. And you guys are way more interested in at least Quads, you are, the timeline. I'm not so much interested in the timeline in Vancouver, more so the fit, because to me, that's been the one hallmark in Jim Rutherford's career. Well, there's actually 2 when it comes to trades. One is when he has made a mistake, or there's been a mistake on his roster, or something that he can't live with, he's really good at cutting bait. There's no emotion involved. It's just like, hey, we got to make a move. We got to get this guy out of here. Can't have this linger. And so you've gotten a slight taste of that with like the Tanner Pearson trade, or maybe even the Dickinson trade. And he's been able to just say, you know what, this might suck in the meantime, but we have to do this. So that's one. And the second one, which I think is way more fun to think about, is he seems to have the golden touch when it comes to taking a really good team and adding some completing or finishing pieces, complementary pieces, if you will, to it. And I think back to the number of deadlines that he had, not just in Pittsburgh, but also in Carolina, that he found someone that put those teams over the top. Trevor Daley on the back end, Ron Hainsey, like just guys that even at the time I was like, Trevor Daley, he looks half dead. Were you watching him in Chicago? Like I was like, I can't believe that they think that's the guy to go out and get. And he comes in and he's outstanding for the Penguins and becomes a guy that's immensely popular among his teammates. And Hainsey comes in and he was great. So like you think of those guys that Rutherford's been able to add, and I'm like, that's what he's really good at. I don't know that it's necessarily building from scratch, but the nice thing in Van is he didn't really have to do that. There were some pieces there. Working alongside Patrick Allvin, he's had to cut out a bunch, some bad contracts and some leftover things from the Benning era. But by and large, that's where he's made his pile of money and Stanley Cup rings is right around the trade deadline trying to find fits.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at that Hurricanes team, right? Like, that's the one that I think we're going to focus on a lot. When they went out and got Doug Wade, especially, like, that was early too. Like, that was early, and that's kind of going to be the focus of or anyone else segment, which I can't wait to get to because I want them to make a trade tomorrow, Frank. Frank,
Let me tell you this,
yeah,
Quads.
yeah.
It's not all about you.
Oh, come on now.
The millennials.
The millennials. I'm not even a millennial. I'm Gen Z.
You are
Z.
Gen
Even
Z.
worse.
I was gonna say.
Frank, thanks so much for doing this. Enjoy your weekend. Thanks so much.
I am the silver-haired millennial.
And
you
the
go.
gold medal world junior winner.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks,
See you
Frank.
guys.
All right,
See ya.
Frank.
There he is. Frank Seravalli. Or as we affectionately call no, I'm not gonna call him. You don't like his nickname either, do you? The nicknames we've thrown out for Frank? Have you heard them?
No, I don't think
Oh,
so.
really?
No.
Oh, because he told Matt about them. Matt Sakaris and Blake Price.
Yeah,
Matt
I've heard
Sakaris
of
Price.
them.
Yeah, you've heard of them. They were having a laugh at my expense about my nicknames for Frank. They didn't like none of them liked the nickname apparently. But anyways, I'll tell you it off air because I don't think Frank likes it either. But yes, our thanks to Frank Seravalli for joining us. And with that, let's get to our Anyone Else segment presented by DoorDash. It's time for Anyone Else presented by our friends at DoorDash. It's our listeners' chance to get involved and hit us up in the YouTube live chat. And it's also our listeners' chance to get 25% off and 0 delivery fees on their first order of $15 or more. That's right. For a limited time, our listeners can get 25% off and 0 delivery fees on their first order of $15 or more when they download the DoorDash app and enter code NATION25. That's all capital letters, NATION, and the numbers 25. Offer valid in Canada, subject to change. Terms do apply. Okay. Do we have anyone else's in the chat yet, Grady? Because I feel like we waited a bit to tell people we were going to do it, but people should know by now. So people, get your anyone else's.
They starting their weekend early.
Yeah, I know. We've got a lot of people in the chat too, so we need a lot of people to participate here. Get your anyone else's in. I'll start here. Because it's the one that obviously I really, really want to talk about is when are the Vancouver Canucks going to make a trade? There's a lot that I think goes into this, Jeff. I said it earlier that the top 6 experiment with these bona fide bottom 6 players like Sam Lafferty, like Phil DiGiuseppe, that needs to end. I would say that you could have waited even longer to make a trade if Kuzmenko didn't fall off a cliff like he has this year. And I know I brought that up earlier, but I think now it's just put a spotlight on the fact that Elias Pettersson needs help. Like, he needs help on his line. And I don't think that's too much to ask for him to get a winger that can at least, or has at least a history of playing in an NHL, even middle 6 role, like third line. If you get a third liner for Elias Pettersson, it's still better than what they're trying to put with him right now.
All right, I'm going to echo Frank, though. It's not all about you, Dave. As much as you want the Canucks to make a trade, it takes 2 teams. There has to be a motivated seller. The Canucks are buyers, obviously, or we think that they're going to be. They've already made one trade for Zadorov, and now it does put the spotlight on what's up front. And I know that Tyson Cole's written a piece at Canucks Army about 5-on-5 play for Elias Pettersson. Just in terms of counting stats, like we're into January now. I think some people maybe have forgotten how good his start to the season was. He had 24 points in the first 13 games. He's got 21 points in his last 25. Not even a point a game guy. Now, 21 and 25 is not terrible, but this is a guy that had 102 points last year. His production has dropped. Some of that's the power play has gone a little funky here for the last little while, but also when I rattled off the numbers of Mikheyev and Lafferty, like the guys around him just aren't scoring. So it's hard to pick up points when others aren't doing their part. But back to the trading bit here, I think it's sort of along, like as much as you want it to happen now, and maybe the Canucks want it to happen now, like to Frank's point about the mushy middle, like, you know, let's use Elias Lindholm as an example, because you certainly have enough on this program. Like if you're the Calgary Flames, I think you've won 3 in a row now. Like, are you in the playoff hunt or are you out? And I think there are a bunch of teams in that sort of predicament right now that maybe they're not ready to play. Let's make a deal that it may have to wait if you're the Vancouver Canucks. So you have needs and you have wants if you're the Vancouver Canucks, but it takes 2 teams here to make the deal. You don't want to overpay. Like, obviously, if the Canucks back the Brinks truck up and offer a first rounder or Karamaki and plus, like, you know, you can get to a point that sure, you're going to get other teams' interest, but there's also some fiscal responsibility required here. So I don't think the Canucks are going to go wild overpaying to make a trade. So I do think that sometimes these things take a little bit longer. And even the Horvat deal, it happened at the All-Star break last year, which was, I think it was February 2nd, actually, the day of the trade. So, I mean, we're still 4 weeks away from that happening. As much as Jim Rutherford loves to get out in front, and I looked it up today, the Doug Weight trade in 2006, and we're going back almost 20 years now. But Doug Weight was acquired on Jan 30th. So the last week of January, not the first week of January. And then they added Mark Recchi at the deadline that year as well. So 2 veteran pieces, proven scorers. And, you go back through history, Frank mentioned Trevor Daley and Ron Hainsey. They went out and they got Carl Hagelin as well in Pittsburgh, and he was a piece of those Stanley Cup teams. So it's not just one or two. There is a history here with Jim Rutherford, but it's not necessarily the first week of January. So I do think you're going to have to be a little bit patient at the very least.
Yeah, it's not happening yet. But I also, and again, as much as I want them to make a trade, the thing that I've been thinking about is, yeah, you know what? Their start really affords them the ability to not rush to make a move. And I know we talk about setting the market, and Jim Rutherford loves to do that, but they can afford to wait a little bit. It's not gonna. Again,
well, they can and they can't, because what we touched on earlier, how much more of this Kuzmenko drama can you handle? Can I handle? Can they as an organization? And again, if it does filter into the locker room, if the players are wondering what's going on and they lose a bunch of games where they only score 1 goal, I do think it has the potential to be more of a black cloud over the organization and inside that locker room. I don't think it's there yet, but so they can be patient because of their standings, their place in the standings. But again, they've been drama-free for the most part this season. I don't think they want this to take on a life of its own. And back to Frank's point about Rutherford being pretty decisive, when he senses that something's not working, and Tanner Pearson's a great example in Pittsburgh. They brought Tanner Pearson in. It didn't happen. Gone. And there were other players. I mean, they got Goodbranson, and they turned around and they traded him. I don't think that they're going to let this Kuzmenko thing sort of seep to the point that it really does harm the hockey club. But again, just the fact that he doesn't seem to be learning, I'm with you that the one last night just didn't feel like a message sending thing. It kind of has taken on a different feel now, and one that I don't think is healthy for anybody, the player or the hockey club.
Yeah, and that's all it comes down to, right? Is that you're going to have to find a resolution at some point. And it doesn't seem like at this stage, maybe a month ago, we were talking about how, well, maybe the resolution is Kuzmenko gets it. You've had your meeting in Dallas. You've had that with the player. I don't want to come out and say it's over and just, also someone pointed out, I used the wrong word. I meant reactive. Be too reactive to the recent events. But it feels like it's almost over. Right? It feels like you need to come to some sort of resolution, and that resolution is going to be moving on from this player.
So this is all hypothetical, no reporting whatsoever, but the name has been out there. He was here in town. He scored a couple against the Canucks the other night. Vladimir Tarasenko, proven goal scorer. But if Rick Tocchet has issues with Andrei Kuzmenko, is Vladimir Tarasenko going to do the things, the staples, the non-negotiable?
Exactly.
And so are you, and again, it's just one player and it's a complete hypothetical, but I think that's also has to be taken into account is if you could find a taker for Kuzmenko with his price point, okay, there's your opportunity. You free up some cap space. How do you use it? But I do think it's about bringing in the right kind of player that Rick Tocchet's going to value, Rick Tocchet's going to play. I've heard the name Lawson Krause a fair bit, right? And I'm trying to figure out, he's got 16 goals in Arizona. He played for Tocchet in Arizona, 6'4", 215, way more the profile of the kind of player. But he's in the second year of a 5-year contract. Now, with Arizona, you always wonder, do they want to move off long-term contracts? Quite possibly. But otherwise, they're having a decent season. I think they're knocking on the door of being a wild card team. The idea of them trading a 16-goal scorer at this point for Kuzma, I don't see that happening. I think the Canucks probably would have to somehow sweeten that deal, but Arizona's in that business of taking on contracts and taking on draft picks and those types of things. So I don't know, maybe it's just wishful thinking when people are starting now to handpick names, but to me, Lawson Krause, a guy with a history with Rick Tocchet, with a profile, a size, and a frame of the kind of player that I think Tocchet would value. I don't know. I mean, maybe there is some smoke there, and we'll see ultimately if there is a little bit of fire.
I'm throwing Phil Kessel out there. Phil Kessel, I hear he's been staying active. Cut down on the hot dogs.
And, a history with Tocchet from Pittsburgh, but it doesn't necessarily strike me as a Rick Tocchet kind of player with the things that he's asking of his players here in Vancouver.
That's fair. Yeah, you're right. But
there'd be no acquisition cost.
Well, that and Rick Tocchet's harnessed this player before for good, and you have to
the Kessel whisperer.
Yeah, you have to think that Phil Kessel's a better option in the top 6, or specifically on Pedersen's line.
He scored some goals in this league,
right? I don't know. Anyways, I'd love to see it. Okay. Again, I'm very impatient, is what people are starting to realize. I'm very impatient. Give me good hockey. Give it to me right now. Okay, let's get to a lot of the ones that we got in the chat here. Because this is a good one. I really like this. Corey Anderson brought up the idea of the lotto line, and he kind of said, like, why doesn't Tocchet go to the lotto line? Why doesn't he mix up the lines? Tocchet has gone to the lotto line before. I was waiting for it last night. Like, last night, it felt like, okay, here's your chance. Nobody's doing anything at 5-on-5 except for your third line. You don't want to mix up the third line, so get the lotto line together. Like, whisper in Brock Besser's ear, hey, get right to the front of the net. Go to where you've had so much success this year. Like, I would have thought that'd be a good idea, and someone else.
Actually, I thought low-key Pius Suter actually had a nice night last night on the wing with JT Miller and Besser had 4 shots. Again, the hockey IQ is just there. Every shift you see him positionally. Like, he's not a big body. He's not driving guys into row 5 physically, but he gets in, uses his body well, shields the puck, and I thought he had a nice night. Third line scored, obviously, and had some opportunities in that third period. It was just that Lafferty, Mikheyev, Pedersen just did not have it. And so I didn't know why Tocchet wouldn't go away from that. The idea of loading up with Miller and Besser, I think at times, and you're right, he has done it in game on occasion, but he certainly hasn't started a game that way. Somebody would have to sit Rick down and explain Lotto Line, because I don't think that that's a nickname that he's familiar. It precedes him here in Vancouver. So to him, it would just be loading up with 3 of his best offensive players. Does it soften the rest of the lineup? Absolutely it does. But maybe the benefits are with that line and that third line, the way it's going, like maybe there's enough there to get you through in a game where you didn't need 4 goals. You just needed 1 more to get it to overtime, take your chances. And again, and this goes for most opponents, like the Canucks have so much top end talent. If you can get a game to overtime, I like their chances, even though the record in OT isn't great this year. But after Thomas and Kyrou, like, who are the Blues putting out there? And the Canucks can come at you, and Quinn Hughes can essentially play the full 5 minutes of overtime. It was just about getting that 1 goal they needed to get it to OT, and they couldn't find it last night. We
had a few people in the YouTube live chat bringing up the idea of putting Pius Suter as the second line center, and there was this lineup provided by Steve Bodie on Twitter, or Body, however you pronounce it. Sorry, Steve. And I found it interesting because he has the Lotto line as your first line. He has Kuzmenko with Pius Suter and Ilya Mikheyev as your second line. And then obviously we can all guess who's on the third line. And then your fourth line is Nils Höglander, Nils Amon, and Sam Lafferty. And honestly, if you wanted, I think you could put Nils Höglander on the Suter Mikheyev line. And in terms of minutes played, like, I don't know, maybe that Bluger, Garland, Joshua line starts to get the second line matchup.
Well, I was going to say, like, at some point here, if you're going to run out Suter, Mikheyev, Kuzmenko, and I have no issues with the way you've laid that out, but like at some point we're going to have to move the third line higher on a written depth chart, because right now I would take Bluger, Garland, Joshua over Suter, Mikheyev, Kuzmenko. But let me go down this road briefly. And that is, we saw Connor Garland get elevated to power play 1. That line has been in lockstep. They scored the only goal last night. They've been feeling it for 10 games, 12 games now. And it's nothing special in anything that they do other than hard work. But the chemistry is what's special right now. That's their secret sauce. They're reading off each other. But could Nils Höglander give you what Connor Garland is giving you on that line? Hear me out. And the way that Garland has played, could he not move higher in the lineup at some point here, driving play, spending time in the offensive zone, winning battles? And he is a 20-goal scorer in the National Hockey League. Like, it feels like Tocchet is reluctant to break up that line, and I get it, but Nils Höglander profiles a lot along the lines of Connor Garland in the engine's always going. There's enough offense there if you get him in a creative situation. So I suppose it's a cost-benefit analysis that's required here of moving Garland off a line that is absolutely going, but trying to replace Garland with another Garland so that the original Garland can go up and play higher in the lineup.
I have to disagree there, because Garland is he is the engine of that line, and it's the one thing that's really going for this team right now. And I'm not certain, based on past history, that if you move Connor Garland up to the top 6, no matter how well he's playing on this line that he's on right now, that's going to translate with Elias Pettersson, JT Miller. It definitely hasn't at any point during his Canucks tenure yet, like maybe for 2 or 3 game stretches, but then it quickly fades away. You've got this going for you. I don't think you can move off from it, but I really like the idea that Steve brought up of reuniting the Lotto line. Obviously keep that third line together, but yeah, maybe they
flip lines
flip
2
them.
and 3.
Exactly. And I don't hate that. Okay. This one from Nick P. Do you think McKinnon, McDavid, Matthews, Pasternak, who are Pettersson's apparent salary comparables, maybe he's a tier below
I thought
those
are suggested options for Pettersson's
do you think those guys would be producing better or worse than EP40 with the same line mates EP40 has had? It's an interesting question to some extent, but I also think it's not a direct comparable, because those guys all the guys you've listed are in the tier above Elias Pettersson. Do I think William Nylander, who's about to sign for like 11.5 on a long-term deal with the Toronto Maple Leafs, do I think he would have success if he was playing with Sam Lafferty? I don't know. Probably not. Like, I don't think so. I don't think you'd have the same. I think EP40 is doing fine with what he's being given right now in terms of line mates, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and I do think that you have to come back to Elias Pettersson. I don't think he's been the dominant two-way force that he has been in other seasons. And so I think there has been a little bit of slippage in his play. How much of that is on him? How much it is circumstance, factors around him, the wingers. Like, Ilya Mikheyev should never be the next guy. Like, when we talk about duos, Ilya Mikheyev should be the supportive third member of any line. And right now, with this whole Kuzmenko conundrum, if you will, you're forcing Mikheyev to be a secondary kind of wingman, and then Lafferty on that line, and it just wasn't happening. But again, I think if you back out a little bit, Mikheyev's gone ice cold here. Like, he's not, he's just not a factor, certainly not in the offensive zone. And so, yeah, that's asking an awful lot of Elias Pettersson to do the heavy lifting. People say, hey, wants $12 million, he should be able to make the guys around him better. But I think there are limits to what you can ask of a guy realistically. And so, this is where, to your point off the top, at the start of the season, when Phil DiGiuseppe made this team in the top 6, and good on him, we said that that's not going to last. But we all assumed that Kuzmenko would last, even if there was a drop in his production. Well, now you take Kuzmenko out of there, DiGiuseppe's hurt. And so all of a sudden, this is a team that we said probably needed a top 6 winger at the start of the year. And here they are. And the other part is, people will say, what are you guys talking about? They're the highest scoring team in the NHL. But, you're not going to get 10 every night against San Jose. You're not going to get 8 like they did on opening night against Edmonton. And those 2 games alone make up a big chunk of why they have the best goal differential in the National Hockey League. We're starting to see here 3 of their last 8 games, they've been held to a single goal. And on those 3 occasions, against the Wild, the Flyers, and last night against St. Louis, the Bluger line is the only one that scored. So
yes,
they're finding ways to generate offense in those games where the other lines aren't. Again, Brock Besser had the chance. If he pulls the trigger, maybe it's a different story and a different theme to this show today, but he didn't. And they came up a goal short last night.
So final question. Is it time to reunite the Lotto line? I say yes.
I'm willing to give it a shot, because what I saw last night I didn't like, sort of across the board. It's time to get Kuzmenko back in there. And to play him higher in the lineup. Like, getting him in the lineup, but playing him on the 4th line, to me, serves no purpose. Like, Nils Amon is not a playmaker. It's unlikely that those guys are somehow going to find magic. I think you live with his warts. You give him an opportunity. You continue to work with him on the practice days. But, if there's a turnover, it's not the end of the world, because he still represents the idea of offense. And if he can unlock a little more offense with Elias Pettersson, then, that's good for the hockey club as well. So, I'd be down to see the Lotto line. Again, I think they're going to need some goals in Jersey. I think now Jersey gives up goals as well, but I expect, I don't know if it'll be 6-5 like it was here in the first Hughes Bowl, but I do anticipate that there's going to be some goals in this game in New Jersey. And we should mention, by the way, it's a 7-game road trip for the Canucks, but the Canucks are getting the Devils back-to-back. They're playing tonight against Chicago. So Quinn Hughes can go and watch Connor Bedard and his brothers in person if he wants to, and probably will. I don't know if any of his teammates would go. The alternative is a night off in Manhattan. So they have to weigh the options there. But, the Canucks are getting the Devils on the back half of back-to-backs, and the Devils have had goaltending issues. They'll probably see the Devils' second stringer, who might actually be their third stringer. So, let's see where it goes. But they do catch a break with the Devils team that's playing back-to-back here.
Yep, they do. Let's see. We'll see how it goes. Let's get to our Betway Bet of the day. Actually, I didn't do that game. I thought about doing that game, but I did a different game. Let's get to our Betway Bet of the day, Grady. Let's bring it up. Jeff, are you aware that I'm the biggest Anaheim Ducks fan in Vancouver?
I know you like Frank Vetrano, and in fact, you've tried to broker a deal to get him here, haven't you?
That's right.
Yeah.
Lucas Dostal, big fan, big Dostal guy.
That was the Toronto Sun, by the way.
We ripped them yesterday, and
Good.
I'll do it again. This is our Betway Bet of the day. It is the Anaheim Ducks, who were heavy underdogs tonight against those Winnipeg Jets. To beat those Winnipeg Jets, plus 160 odds, a $10 bet will return you $26 over on Betway. Must be nice plus to play. If you choose to play, please play responsibly.
They got the Jets back-to-back. Jets were in San Jose last night. So they're going to see Jets back up, Laurent Brossoit. But have you seen, nobody's talking about the Winnipeg Jets. They should be. 26 games now without surrendering more than 3 goals. Like, they give up nothing. And Anaheim, I think, has 1 win in its last 10. I hear you looking for some value there, the long shot, but I think the old
Winnipeg's good.
Duckaroos are going to be in. They're going to be in tough.
Yes, they are. And hey, I don't know. I don't want to get too much into Winnipeg, but I just, all the stuff with Rick Bowness.
Yeah, they see them 3 times. So, like, at some point here, we are going to have to start talking about the Winnipeg Jets a little bit more.
Just all the stuff with Rick Bowness, Blake Wheeler. I honestly, I'm happy for the Jets. I'm happy for the Jets, their fans, all 10,000 of them.
Lost Kyle Connor.
Yeah.
And haven't skipped a beat.
Yeah.
And the fact that Rick Bowness stepped away there for a while, and that didn't have any sort of impact negatively or positively, but that can cause confusion and different voices and whatever. And again, they just cruised on through and have absolutely been on a heater here for a while.
It's a good team over there. And in the words of Travis Green, that's a good team over there. All right. We'll close it out there. Jeff, thanks so much for doing this on Friday. So for my co-host, Jeff Paterson, and our technical producer, Grady Sass, our thanks again to Frank Seravalli for joining us on today's episode. My name is Dave Quadrelli. Thank you so much, the listener, for listening to another episode of the Canucks Conversation. Canucks Conversation with Harman and Quads every weekday at 2 p.m. Be sure to check it out on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. And if you missed it, go check it out on your favorite podcast catcher app.